time to learn the basic settings on your camera. Okay, again, I do repeat myself a lot because I want to emphasize certain points. And the main point to understand here is that, again, we're just talking about my world of photography and what works in my world. If you know more than I do about photography, or you have different ideas, you go ahead and try those ideas, but to do so at your own peril. Remember that, again, I'm speaking from experience doing managing, being on, producing over 10,000 shoots. So if you have some ideas to make things better, or you don't agree with what I'm saying, I go ahead. But what I'm going to tell you works, and the idea here is to kind of keep out of trouble and teach you, the basics of what works. So let's, I have this is a Canon digital camera. It's an EOS. I have a Nikon D3100, which is the camera that I kind of recommend because you can get them used cheap. They all kind of have they all have these buttons with different pictures, different like when is the people, flowers, the mountains, all that stuff. Different, AV, TV, ADP. I don't know what all that is. Okay. I'm just going to tell you that in general, the P button for program and the M button for manual are the two buttons you're going to use in my world. Okay, and the program setting button is I'll get to that a little bit later, but you can do, if you have you want to use your pop-up flash for individual pictures, and you have a dedicated TTL flash, like a Canon flash to put on a Canon camera, a Nikon flash to put on a Nikon camera, or one that's compatible, that talks to the camera. You can use these programs, the P setting, the program setting. You can use that and get acceptable results 99% of the time, maybe more, as long as you don't add anything to that. If you don't change some other setting or whatever, the program settings will generally give you an acceptable picture, especially the pop-up doing photography, doing the individual photos from about 5 feet away, which would be at about 40 millimeters on one of these kit lenses. If you're farther back than 4 or 5 feet, the pop-up flash is not going to be strong enough to fill in the shadows. And you can't do group photos with the pop-up flash. It's just not strong enough. But you can do individual photos with it, and I have a video on using the pop-up indoors too, from about 7 feet back, because indoors the pop-up would be your main light, and your setting camera, we'll get into this later, but basically indoors the pop-up doesn't have to match the sunlight, so it can be your main light from about 7 feet away, whereas outdoors you're matching the sunlight. You don't want to be more than like about 5 feet away with a pop-up in most scenarios. Okay, so again, P and M, all that other stuff, I don't know, you might know more about it than me, but I'm not going to go there. Your white balance, look, don't set it on auto. The cameras are they're great. I mean, auto might work, it might not work, it might do something crazy, but there's no reason to set it on auto. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff with auto white balance, or some custom white balance. I mean, good Lord, keep it off the custom settings, whatever you do. Okay. White balance outdoors, set it to daylight. Yeah, you're going to use flash, but your ambient light is sunshine, and that's kind of determining the color space of the photo. Indoors, set it to flash, okay? Because your flash is going to be your only source of light. At least it should be. You shouldn't be getting, when you're indoors, you should be cutting out any ambient light. You don't want overhead lights impacting your image. You don't want sunlight coming through the windows impacting your image. You want your flash to be the only source of light that is impacting the image, okay? And I'll explain that later. But let's just say white balance will always be set to daylight outdoors, and it will always be set to flash indoors. And if you do something else, you're on your own. Okay, you didn't do what I recommended. ISO, and this is your sensitivity setting. Set it to ISO 100 if your camera will allow that, or set it to ISO 200 if that's your limitation. Okay, don't go higher than that. And let me explain something here. I understand that there's situations where you have low light, not indoors, because your flash should be taking care of your lighting indoors. You should have a strong enough flash to do what you need it to do. There might be a situation indoors where your flash is not strong enough to do what you need it to do, in which case you didn't necessarily bring the right equipment, but where you might go on a higher ISO. But I'm not going to get into that kind of special situation. I'm just going to tell you that in my entire photography career, I shot every single picture I ever took using 100 ASA film, and I did a great job in all circumstances. And I always brought the right equipment for the job. So if you get yourself into a situation in youth sports photography, again, my limited world here, this team and individual posed world of photography, 100 ISO, you can set your camera on that and forget it. If you have one of those few models that won't let you do 100 but 200, do that. Okay, so that's off the table. I really don't need to go much into that, much more. Oh, one thing I'll mention, there's some low light outdoor situations where some photographers will chase their background. Either they're early in the morning, they'll set their ISO to be real sensitive, or as the sun goes down, they'll set it to be real sensitive, not because their subject is getting dark, but because the background, meaning the mountains or the trees or the sky, is getting dark in them, and they're kind of trying to keep that little bit of background, because your ISO is not really going to impact your subject as much as it is your background. I'm going to tell you right now that is such a limited time period on a shoot when that's necessary. It's not even necessary. You don't really need to do it. If you do it in the morning, you get to a shoot and you set your ISO a little sensitive in the morning because you want to see the background a little better. Half an hour later, the sun's up. You don't need it. You forgot to put it back to 100 like I recommended. And the rest of the day, you're blowing out your images because you forgot to change it. And also changing it at night as the sun goes down. Yeah, okay, limited, very limited. If you really know what you're doing, you might get a few pictures that are marginally better, but from the time you have good sunlight to the time you have no sunlight is just a very, few minutes there. And messing around with something like your ISO, unless you absolutely precisely know what you're doing, there's no reason to do it. Back in the day, we only had 100 ASA film, so we couldn't do it anyway. We didn't have 400 ASA film with us. So I did great, and you can too, and you don't ever need to change this ISO from 100, or if you're limited to 200. By the way, I really prefer the cameras that go to 100. So ISO 100, that's it. Okay, we don't need to go beyond that. Your shutter speed. Okay, indoors, I'm going to tell you right now what to set it at. Set it at your maximum sync speed. If your camera syncs at 200, that's your maximum sync. Okay, set it at 200 indoors. If your camera syncs at 250, set it at 250. I don't know many cameras nowadays that sync below 200. It's usually 200 or 250. Whatever that is, if you don't know what it is, Google it, and you're using manual settings, set it, okay? If you're using a dedicated flash system, meaning the pop-up or a flash that talks to the camera, you don't need to worry too much about that. The camera's going to set that automatically. And I'm going to give you a hint. It's not going to go above the sync speed, and it's not going to go below a 60th. So you're going to be, generally speaking, okay. But if you're going to set it manually, there's no reason not to set it to the maximum sync speed, okay? So that's off the table indoors. Outdoors, here you go. I'm going to tell you a setting that's going to work 99.9% of the time. Set your shutter speed to 1/25th. okay? Because I don't know of any digital cameras that sync lower than that, so you'll always have that door fully open when the flash goes off. My limited world is 250 if that's the maximum sync, and that's usually the maximum that some of these cameras go to, and a 60th, which is anything below that, you're going to get camera shake. Don't go below that. A 60th and maximum sync, either 200 or 250. Right in the middle is 125th, and so if you set your camera on 125th, you're in there. I mean, you're not going to be so far off. In fact, most of the time you're going to be dead on with that, and your shutter speed is by and large determining the exposure on the background. Okay, it's the flash and the f-stop working together. The flash and the f-stop, the aperture, that are determining the exposure on the kid. Okay, on your subject. So your shutter speed, you know, if you want, should it be a 60th or should it be 200? Look, if it's a bright sunny day and you're shooting towards the sun, towards the bright sky, there's sky in the image, okay, probably it's going to be maximum sync 200. If there's dark trees, you know, the forest in the background, it's overcast, 125th or a 60th, never below a 60th, okay? All of that kind of playing with your shutter speed, you can do that, okay? You can fine tune it. Again, if you're shooting all program stuff, it's going to pick it for you. If you're shooting manual, limited world, you know, dark outside, starting to get dark. Okay, before you'd ever touch your ISO, take your shutter speed down to a 60th. You know, you'll let in more background light. Your flash, don't change a thing from what you did when it was bright and sunny, because you're still setting the subject with the flash and the aperture working together. So look, what did we say? White balance, outdoors, daylight, indoors, flash, ISO, 100, leave it, okay? Shutter speed, 125th, always okay. Dark in the background, maybe a 60th, super bright in the background, go to 200 or 250, depending on the maximum sync. If you're outside of the parameters of what I'm telling you here, 9 times out of 10, you're screwing it up, okay? You're messing up your exposure, okay? So now this takes us to the aperture setting. And by the way, all that special stuff, exposure compensation, all these tricky things that cameras can do that I don't even know about, just turn it all off, okay? If you had it on the night before because you were doing something for some other type of photography, turn it all off, set it to neutral, set it to 0, make it not work. I don't want it to mess anything up because it's probably not going to help, okay? So now we get to where 99% of the problems exist, which is flash and f-stop. What you need to understand about your aperture, your f-stop setting, is it's directly related to the flash. The shutter is not. The shutter is either open all the way when the flash goes off, which sets the exposure at that moment, or it's partially closed or closed. If it's open, the flash gets through the door completely, hits the sensor. It doesn't matter if it's open longer or shorter amount of time, as long as it's fully open, the millisecond, you know, that flash goes off. That hits the sensor and sets the kids, the lighting on the kid at that moment, okay? So that's where 90% of the problems occur, and most of the problems that we see are over or under exposure. Most of it is overexposure that we see, and most of it is simply the f-stop, the aperture is too far open given the flash power or given the ambient light. And I'm going to tell you right now some basic settings. Outdoors, okay, sunlight, daylight, as your background, okay, you should be at f8 or f11, okay? Very, very limited times, maybe in high altitude where there's less atmosphere, are you going to be at f16. But even then, f8 or f11, f8 if it's kind of dark and overcast, f11 if it's sunny, okay? f8, f11, outdoors 97% of the time. f8 or f11 works. Indoors, f8 or f5.6 sometimes, but f8 most of the time. Okay, maybe f11 depending on the power of your flash. So again, you know, f5.6, very rare that I want to see that. Almost never f4. Okay, almost never. Okay, in fact, I can tell you right now, in all the years that I shot pictures, I don't think I used f4 more than one time in an extremely low light situation. I probably didn't even need to do that. Okay, so let's just limit our world to f5.6, f8, f11, and if you're shooting up in the mountains with less atmosphere, an extreme bright sunny day, maybe you can go to f16 with a strong flash, but probably not. So so there's our world right there. So let's say it's a bright sunny day. You're shooting outdoors, and I don't care if your flash is a dedicated flash, the pop-up, or you've set everything manual. Okay, if you've set it on program and you've got a dedicated flash TTL, your camera is not going to go below a 60th, and it's not going to go higher than your sync speed. So you know, and it's not going to go, generally speaking, it's not going to go below f5.6 or above f11. I mean, those are going to be the exposures you're going to see when you look on your data back. You're going to see that you set the white balance to daylight. You set the white balance to flash indoors. You've set that, and then the program settings are going to pick settings within my world. They're just going to do that automatically. If you've set your program settings up right, put it on P, it's just going to naturally pick the settings I'm talking about. Okay, if you're setting your camera manually, you should pick these settings. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the f-stop and the flash, but I essentially just went through the basic settings. So if you knew nothing about photography, and believe me, I hire people that know nothing and they do a fantastic job. I'll tell you what they do. I teach them to do individual pictures, and I only teach them one thing. Put the camera on P and turn it on, take the lens cap off, pop up the flash, take pictures from 5 feet away on P. Okay? Now we use shade canopies. I teach them how to crop. You know, obviously they have to know the correct cropping and posing. But on P, which is programmed with, you know, this is the pop-up is automatically dedicated. It's wired right into the flash. That's for your individual pictures. Okay. Now your team pictures, it's not strong enough. But you can do individual pictures all day long with this pop-up from 5 feet outdoors on P and get acceptable results. Again, white balance set to daylight. Okay. The other thing I want to mention about f-stop and how it relates to the flash is or just dedicated versus non-dedicated flash. Let's go into that. The one thing you need to be extremely careful of, and I get some massively screwed up shoots because of this, is a dedicated flash is a flash that talks to the camera. There's communication between the camera and the flash. So the camera is controlling the flash power, and it's matching it to the f-stop on the camera, you know, and it's keeping that shutter speed within a position where the door's fully open when the flash goes off. The key thing here is that, and this is where things go wrong, if you put a flash that's not dedicated to the camera on top of that camera does not know there's a flash there. So when you put that camera on program, it's going to pick an ambient light setting. It's not going to pick a setting that works with the flash automatically. You might get lucky and it picks an ambient light setting that works with that flash, but that's going to be an accident. Okay? The camera, if you put a Nikon flash on a Canon camera, they don't talk the same language. If you put a Vivitar, like I like the Vivitar 283, but I shoot on manual, if you put that Vivitar on top of a Canon or a Nikon or any other camera, it's not going to know there's a flash there. So it might pick a shutter speed that's above the sync. It might pick a f-stop that's too wide open relative to the power of that flash, and you'll be blowing your kids out because the flash is set at a higher power than it should be with that wide open aperture. I see that all the time, you know, and someone will say, well, I use my flash, the pictures are great, my flash was in the shop, I borrowed my friend's flash, I put it on the camera, I didn't go to manual, I left it on program, and everything is a catastrophe. It's overexposed, half the pictures don't have a flash because the camera was outside and it picked 800th of a second, the shutter was halfway closed when the flash fired. So you got to be extremely careful if you're going to use program settings that you are using a flash that talks to that camera. Don't borrow someone's flash if you don't know what you're doing. It's always that. It's, oh, I borrowed a flash, okay? Or at the shoot, I didn't have batteries for mine. I borrowed Joe's. I put it on my camera, and you screwed everything up because that flash didn't talk to that camera. So just be extremely careful about that. So we'll do another video where we go into f-stop and flash, the relationship between those things, and how you can know what's right. You know, we'll talk a little bit about the guide numbers and whatnot too. Okay, thank you.